Rain lashed against the windows, each drop a tiny hammer against the glass, echoing the turmoil outside. Thunder rattled the old building, shaking its very foundations, as if the storm was trying to tear it apart. It was the kind of night that sent shivers down your spine, the kind that made you feel like you were not alone even when you were. Especially when you were alone in a place like this, where every shadow seemed to hide a secret.
Breathing heavily. The air was thick with tension, each breath a struggle against the oppressive atmosphere.
Sarah, a young nurse on her first night shift, hurried inside County General. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum, each beat a reminder of her anxiety. She clutched her bag tightly, her knuckles white with the effort. She had heard stories, whispered tales of strange occurrences. This hospital had a reputation, one that sent chills down the spines of even the most seasoned staff. People whispered about things that went bump in the night, about shadows that moved on their own, and eerie sounds that echoed through the halls. Sarah tried to push those thoughts away, to focus on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to let fear take over. She had a job to do, patients to care for, and she couldn't let her imagination get the better of her.
Whispering to herself, "Come on, Sarah, focus, you can do this, just breathe."
She made her way to her station, each step echoing in the empty corridor, the sound a lonely reminder of her solitude. Rain continued to batter the windows, the relentless drumming a constant background to her thoughts. Every gust of wind seemed to moan through the empty halls, a mournful sound that only added to the eerie atmosphere. The air felt heavy, thick with something Sarah couldn't quite place. It felt like dread, a palpable sense of unease that clung to her like a second skin. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the long night ahead. The night shift was eerily quiet. Sarah made her rounds, her footsteps echoing in the deserted corridors. The silence was unnerving. It felt as though the walls themselves were holding their breath.
Pausing, did I just hear?
Every now and then, Sarah thought she heard something. A whisper? A sigh? She would stop, listen intently. But there was nothing but the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead.
Exhaling, just my imagination, right?
She checked on her patients one by one. Each room felt colder than the last. The air grew thick, harder to breathe. Fear, she realized, was a suffocating thing. As Sarah passed the nurse's station, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The once familiar corridor now seemed like a scene from a horror movie. She stopped, her pulse quickening, her breath catching in her throat. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional hum of the flickering lights. She could have sworn she saw something move in the shadows at the end of the hall. Her eyes strained to make out the figure, but the darkness seemed to swallow it whole. A dark figure, tall and slender, gone as quickly as it appeared. It was as if the shadows themselves had come to life, playing tricks on her weary mind.
Muttering, "It's just fatigue, Sarah, just fatigue. You've been working too many night shifts."
She told herself it was just her imagination. The mind can play cruel tricks when it's tired, she reasoned. Fatigue playing tricks on her eyes. She rubbed them, hoping to clear the fog of exhaustion. The old hospital was full of shadows, each corner hiding potential phantoms. The building's age only added to its eerie atmosphere. But deep down, a chill settled in her stomach. Something was not right. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive.
Nervously, "Keep it together, you're just tired, there's nothing there."
She continued her rounds, her senses on high alert. Every sound, every shadow seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. It was an instinctual reaction, a primal fear that she couldn't shake. She felt like she was being watched. The sensation was so strong, it was almost tangible. Every creak of the floorboard sent a jolt of fear through her. She tried to steady her breathing, but the fear was relentless, gnawing at her resolve. The temperature dropped suddenly as Sarah approached room 13. The air grew heavy, oppressive. She paused outside, listening. A cold shiver ran down her spine, and then she heard it. A whisper, faint but distinct.
Whispering, "What was that?"
Someone or something was saying a name. "Daniel, Daniel!" The voice was weak, raspy, filled with a deep sorrow.
Gasping, "Daniel!"
Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Daniel. That was the name of the patient who had died in that room just a few nights ago. An unexplained death. The doctors had been baffled.
Terrified. "Oh no!"
Section 5. The Charts. An Unexplained Death. This chapter delves into the mysterious and unsettling events that transpired in the hospital, leaving everyone baffled and on edge.
Sarah hurried back to the nurse's station. She needed to see Daniel's chart, confirm his cause of death. The urgency in her steps mirrored the pounding of her heart. She had to know what had happened to him, why he had died so suddenly. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. There it was, cause of death, unknown. The words seemed to leap off the page, mocking her. How could this be? Daniel had been a healthy young man, with no prior medical conditions.
A strange feeling washed over Sarah, a mix of fear and curiosity. She had seen many patients come and go, but this was different. There was something deeply unsettling about the whole situation. She had never been one to believe in ghosts. But what else could explain the strange occurrences tonight? The shadowy figure, the flickering lights, the voice whispering Daniel's name. It was as if the hospital itself was alive, trying to communicate with her.
She had to know more. She pulled up Daniel's medical records on the computer. He had been admitted just a week ago complaining of chest pains and difficulty breathing, but the tests had all come back normal. No signs of any serious issues. Then one night, he just died, just like that. No warning, no signs. It was as if his life had been snuffed out by an unseen force. The room where he had died was now empty, but it felt heavy with an unspoken presence. The medical equipment stood silent, as if bearing witness to the inexplicable event. Sarah spoke to Dr. Mitchell, hoping for some answers, but even he was at a loss. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted, shaking his head. "It's as if he just stopped living." The frustration and confusion were evident in his voice. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah decided to investigate further. She walked down the dark hallway, her flashlight cutting through the shadows. She entered the room where Daniel had died, hoping to find some clue, some explanation for the unexplained death. As she examined the room, she found a hidden note tucked away in a corner. The note was cryptic, but it hinted at something sinister. It was a clue, a piece of the puzzle that might help her understand what had happened to Daniel. Sarah knew she was on the right track. The note was just the beginning. She had to keep digging, keep searching for the truth. She couldn't let Daniel's death remain unexplained. She owed it to him and to herself to find out what had really happened.
Section 6. The power flickers, a scream echoes.
As Sarah scrolled through Daniel's records, the lights flickered again. This time they went out completely, plunging the nurse's station into darkness. Sarah gasped, her heart pounding. A blood-curdling scream pierced the darkness. It came from down the hall, near room 13. Panic surged through Sarah. She fumbled for her flashlight, her hands shaking so badly she could barely switch it on.
She ran towards the sound of the scream, her heart pounding in her chest. The hallway was pitch black, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else, something metallic, like blood. Section 7. Searching for the source, another cold spot. The beam of Sarah's flashlight danced across the walls as she ran. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The scream echoed in her ears, even though it had stopped as abruptly as it began. She reached room 13. The door was slightly ajar. A cold spot hit her like a wall as she pushed the door open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway behind her.
"Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Is anyone in here?"
There was no answer, only the sound of her own breathing and the pounding of her heart. Sarah returned to the nurse's station, her mind racing. She had to find a logical explanation for what was happening. She pulled up the patient records again, focusing on the patients who had been in room 13 before Daniel. One name jumped out at her.
"Emily Carter."
Emily had died in room 13 2 months ago, cause of death unknown. Sarah pulled up Emily's medical records. Her symptoms were almost identical to Daniel's. Chest pains, difficulty breathing, and then nothing. A terrifying thought occurred to Sarah. What if whatever had happened to Daniel and Emily was happening again? What if there was another patient in danger? Sarah quickly scanned the patient list. There was only one patient currently in room 13, a young woman named Melissa. Sarah pulled up Melissa's chart. Her heart sank. Melissa had been admitted just hours ago complaining of chest pains and difficulty breathing. The pattern was too clear to ignore. The same symptoms, the same room, the same unknown cause of death.
"I have to get to Melissa now."
Fear pulsed through Sarah. She had to get to Melissa, now! Another scream ripped through the hospital, louder this time. It was Melissa. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed a crash cart and sprinted towards room 13. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she ran. Fear was replaced by a fierce determination to save her patient. She burst through the door of room 13, ready for anything. But the room was empty. The bed was made. There was no sign of Melissa. Only the faint smell of blood lingered in the air. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the room, her mind reeling. Where was Melissa? What was happening? And then she saw it. Scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood were 3 words. "Help me, Sarah."
Oh my God, that's my handwriting!
Sarah's blood ran cold. It was her handwriting. A cold hand clasped over her mouth, stifling her scream. A raspy voice whispered in her ear.
Don't worry, you're next.
The last thing Sarah saw before everything went black was a shadowy figure standing over her, its eyes glowing an eerie red in the darkness.